Hi, hello, I hope you're taking care of yourself. If you're new here, my name is Lexi. Welcome to the video. We're so back. Here's the thing. I was trying to think of a way to project some holiday cheer and light and love following a pretty not great November for most of us. And we do a lot of discourse here at Newly Nova. We do a lot of tasteful critique of popular books, particularly popular romance books. And look, I'm not afraid to die for what I believe in, okay? One thing about me is I will always tell you the truth, even if I wish that the truth were very different, even if I want to be a nicer person than I am. I still don't know how to pretend to enjoy books that I don't. It's not a skill I have. But today I'm doing a video that I've been meaning to do for a while because, and this might surprise you, but when I post 2-hour rant reviews roasting bad romance novels on the internet, there is always a small faction of people in my comments that believes that the only reason why I would dare make such videos is because I have this like bone deep hatred of women. It's the only thing that makes sense. They're all my enemies, I guess. It's the only reason why I would critique anything. And look, you can believe whatever you want to believe about me, but now that I've made this video, I'm going to be putting it in the description box for all of my roasts. And new rule for the channel, you're not allowed to comment that I hate women until you read all of these recommendations, and then once you're done, you can send over a 5-paragraph book report, Times New Roman, double-spaced is fine, and you can send that over to my email, which is here for your convenience. And you know what? If you do the work, I'll allow it. You can say that I'm a misogynist, but I think that accidentally what will happen instead is you'll just end up reading a bunch of bangers and you'll recognize the error of your ways. Because classic disclaimer moment on this channel, the title for this video is both clickbait and not. Like, I'm not saying that 99% of romance novels are chaff and this is the wheat, these are the only good ones. Like, obviously I don't believe that, but it just so happens that I read a lot of popular books because I like to stay current. I like to be a part of conversations about whatever's big at the time. And a lot of popular romance novels right now are just not exactly to my taste for any number of reasons. But I also think that there are lots of popular romance books, even right now, that are like fantastic and moving stories. And I will die on that hill. There are not very many things that piss me off more than people who write off the entire romance genre or even just romances on TikTok as just all being like Colleen Hoover dollar store pulp. I also get comments from people like that who think that just because I thought that Twisted Love was a train wreck, that take will appease me. And it really does not. There are good books in every genre, just as there are bad ones hidden in plain sight around you all of the time. But this is a video about the good ones. These are some romance novels that have been really popular over the last few years that have received my personal stamp of approval, whatever that means to you. In this video, first off, I'm going to talk a little bit about my taste, the things that I personally look for and enjoy in books, which will hopefully give you an idea if my taste is similar to yours, because it's not a crime to like things that I don't like or dislike things that I enjoy. I'm not God, you can have your own preferences. And then after that, I'm going to give you all of my recommendations. I have like a dozen books I think to talk about that will hopefully keep you warm during this trying time this winter. It's just that simple today. We're taking it easy. But before we get into that, I just have a quick word from the sponsor of today's video, which is Book of the Month. If you are looking for a last-minute holiday gift idea for somebody in your life who loves to read so much that it's become like a core component of their personality, one of the best things that you could do for that person is get them a Book of the Month subscription. If you have never heard of Book of the Month before, it is a monthly subscription service that hand selects 5 or 6 of the most exciting new releases that are coming out in any given month. You get to pick whichever one sounds the best to you, or if none of them sound particularly good, you can just skip that month for no charge and hop back in the next month. And then whatever title you end up picking, they ship it directly to you and it lands on your doorstep inside of this wonderful blue box. Picking out a specific book for somebody that you know who reads a lot, but you don't have the encyclopedic knowledge of every book that they've ever read can be really, really difficult, but empowering them to choose for themselves from a selection of books that will almost certainly be bangers is way better. I'm actually going to be talking about 2 books that I got from Book of the Month later in this very video as recommendations, so I can personally attest to the fact that they're usually quite good. And this month, the 2 that I picked are first The 13th Child by Erin A. Craig, which is kind of a goth, dark, young adult fantasy with courts and rakish princes and deals with ineffable forces beyond the comprehension of mortal men, you know, just the classics. And then I also picked I Might Be in Trouble, which is about this guy who goes on a date, but then he wakes up the next morning and this guy is just dead in the bed beside him, and he has to solve the mystery of how in the world that happened so that way he doesn't go to jail, you know? So that's a situation with my books, but if you want to read either of these or any of the other titles that Book of the Month has chosen for December, you can use the code TINSEL to get not just your very first Book of the Month book for $5, as is usually the case, but also as a fun holiday thing, you can also get this cute hat and also these fun holiday stickers as long as supplies last. They're really going all out this December. Strongly, strongly recommend. I love Book of the Month. I love working with them. I love my pretty rainbow shelf of Book of the Month books, and you should check them out, okay? let's get back to it. Okay, hello, welcome back. So yeah, before we start, I feel like it would be useful for you to have an idea of what I personally look for in romance novels because it's different for everybody. And I'm using a pyramid to describe this to you. It makes sense, okay? Just bear with me. These two things on the bottom I consider to be the foundation for enjoying any book. It's not specific to romance, but I do expect romance to also have these things if I'm going to like the book. It's pretty hard to come back from not having them. And the first thing is solid writing. I find it really hard to overlook the awkward and stilted prose that you are going to be seeing a lot in popular books that have clearly never had an editor because they went from being self-published into the mainstream extremely quickly. And it's not like a cardinal sin not to have an editor. I mean, not everybody who wants to self-publish a book can afford one, but when something completely blows up out of nowhere, you can always tell when having a second set of eyes might have been beneficial. Also just in things like spelling errors and bad grammar and excessive repetition, more than just a few times. I mean, you're gonna find typos in best-selling Stephen King releases sometimes. It's just a part of the game. I'm talking beyond the pale, where it's not just somebody messing up once or twice and nobody caught it. It's like constantly noticeable. I'm sorry to be insufferable. This is like one of my most elitist opinions, but I can't do it. I can't do it. I find it extremely distracting. I was a writing tutor in college, and I feel like too much of that just activates the lobe in my brain that's used to freshman English students coming in and asking me to check their grammar, and then they hand me this like whole essay that's just one paragraph, 3 pages long, font size 13. But this is like a best-selling book. It's not just some 18-year-old who doesn't have a lot of writing experience. I don't know, man. There's nothing I can do. I can't do it. But other than the technical stuff, when it comes to the actual quality of the writing, beyond editors just generally being good to have for this as well, it's not like you have to blow my mind in a romance novel. Honestly, sometimes I feel like it's better if you don't try to, because some of the worst romantasy that I've ever read is just the author really thinking that they're going off when they are most definitely not. So it doesn't have to be like incredible. I just want it to be readable and nice and have some good lines somewhere in there that make me smile. I especially want the dialogue, I think, to read like things that real people would say, or even if they're not things that real people would say, I want to wish that that would be the case. Like I want it to feel like some evolved form of human communication where everybody is just cleverer and more fun. That can be a good time as well, but be careful because stray too far from that line and you end up sounding like an alien again. So that's what I mean by solid. It can't be noticeably bad. That's the bar. The second foundational thing that I need is strong characterization. I need our two main characters to make sense, to have reasons that they are the way that they are that don't feel stupid or contrived. And I need them to react to situations throughout the book from the beginning to the end in a way that feels true to their character and to the arc that they're on. Pretty frequently in romances that have an internal conflict, you'll get these unsupported emotional 180s really late in the game to solve whatever problems the characters are having, so that way they can finally be together. But in reality, when you think about it for longer than like 3 seconds, nothing has really changed about the situation, and it doesn't make any sense at all for the characters to be acting that way. That is poor characterization, and I think that's the kind that is the most common in romance. I also don't want any self-insert blank slate Nancys. No Bella Swans in the house anymore in the year of our Lord 2024, okay? Also worth noting with this that in most books I really enjoy unlikable characters because believably unlikable characters are also normally strong characters, but with romance in particular, it is a little bit more complex because I have to believe by the end of the book that these two people are deserving of love, that they should be together, right? So if they're going to be unlikable, they better be unlikable in this way that's kind of like relatable, where it's like, so true, people suck sometimes, we do stupid things for fun, but they suck in a way that is also redeemable. Because if you just have an abusive man who is 10 years older than the main character and his primary personality traits are just having no emotions and being mean and like hunting down his enemies for sport with a gun, and whatever reason he has for being the way that he is just kind of sucks and I don't care and it doesn't make up for anything, I don't like him. I'm probably not going to buy that he deserves a happy ending with whatever character he's being mean to. Because if you didn't know, having a happy ending is like required in the romance genre, like definitionally. So yeah, I need good characters. I need to be at least kind of rooting for them and kind of interested in their inner worlds and ambitions. And you might think that both of these are kind of low bars, but that's kind of the point. You don't need anything truly insane, but if you're missing one of these foundational pieces, it doesn't matter if you have every part of the rest of the pyramid. I'm going to think that the book kind of sucks. And you would be surprised just how often, in my opinion, in popular books, one of these two things is missing completely. But moving on. Standing sentinel on top of this foundation, we have 3 elements of romance that really make books stand out to me within their genre. First up is yearning. What's there to say about this? I definitely have liked books that don't have a suitable amount of yearning before, where they're just kind of instantly into each other, or maybe they sleep together before there's any real emotional development in the relationship. Like, it's possible for me to go mostly yearnless, okay? But even even in those books, you need something that is keeping those two main characters apart, and you need them to be extremely sad about it. That's what it's all for at the end of the day, okay? As a natural born yearner, I would like it to hit them extremely slowly and then all at once, just how much they care about each other. I want them to be, by the climax of the book, like gnawing at the bars of their enclosure with desire and angst. Even if they shouldn't, even if there is something that is keeping them apart, that is beyond their control, actually, especially if they shouldn't and that is happening, I need them to be rendered stupid with how much they want each other anyways. It's the only way to give me any dopamine anymore. It's the only thing that is still guaranteed to work. I feel like a lot of my taste in romance, unfortunately, was shaped by my long and storied history as a fan fiction enjoyer, and this is definitely the biggest one. My favorite couples frequently wouldn't even be canon, so the entire show, like all of the source material, for people like me, it was just all yearning fodder where you pretend that they want each other so bad as they're going on all of these adventures, and then you finish what's canon and you go on to read these 200,000 word fan fictions where 3/4 of that is also yearning to be together but not actually being together. But then when they would finally get together, like, it is a sweetness like no fruit you have ever tasted when you put all of that work in and you're finally rewarded. So that's where this comes from. I do think I've chilled out. I've gotten more realistic now. I don't need like 2,000 pages before they can hold hands for the first time, but you need to give me something. Like, I need to scratch that primordial itch if I'm going to really, really love the book. Okay, next up, I've added some doodles to fill the space. I need turmoil. I need there to be some amount of angst in order for me to feel anything at all. More is usually better, unfortunately, for my mental health. Like, even in my happily ever after books, I like the roller coaster. I miss the rage. That's me when I'm reading my silly, goofy romance novels. I have tried reading like pure slice of life romance novels before, but in my head, they just kind of devolve into being these boring smut montages. I just don't like them. They're not for me. I need there to be like a little bit of emotional distress for me to start to care about anybody in the book. And it doesn't have to be insane. Like, several of the books I'm going to be talking about later in this video aren't particularly sad or dramatic, but they are interesting. And the characters are still clearly going through things that matter to them, whether internally or externally, and you care as the reader about whether or not they're going to end up doing okay. At a base level, I want a conflict that feels real to the characters. It's not contrived, it actually matters, it's causing distress in their lives. Bonus points if you also make me feel sad or if you write something that I unfortunately relate to, but that's not even outright necessary. I want to care about the emotional journey of the characters in the book. It's getting dark at like 4 p.m. where I am right now, so my apologies for the lighting, but we're gonna power through the rest of this pyramid. Last but not least in this section, I need chemistry, because even if the two main characters are good on their own, even if I think they're interesting and cool, there is no guarantee that I'm going to believe that they will actually be good for each other inside of a relationship. Because sometimes I feel like I read a book and it's like one of those kind of terrifying symbol monkey things, except you like tore off one of the symbols and you replaced it with, I don't know, like a bar of soap, and the author just sets the monkey off like that and it starts clapping. You know, like, symbols are pretty cool and soap also is pretty cool, but just banging together one symbol and a bar of soap really loudly, I'm not gonna start believing that they're a good pair, even if they're good individually, just because you chose to do that, you know? I need it to make sense. I need them to have clear reasons why they like the other person. I need them to have good banter. I need them to have fun with each other. I need making the decision to be in that relationship to track with how they're characterized individually. And ideally, I need being together to make them into better versions of themselves. Because if none of that is true, like, the central conceit of romance is that you are happy that they end up together at the end. The entire house of cards just starts to fall apart if I don't care, or worse, if I think that they should break up, which also happens sometimes. So this one is pretty important. Finally, at the top of the pyramid, and kind of uniting a lot of what I talked about in this middle section, and I think the essential component that determines whether I will like or really love a book, and just bear with me here because I'll be real, I don't know if I can explain this in a way that really makes sense, but I'm sure going to try. I need a reason for it all to be the way that it is inside of the book, and this can really be anything. I think that for me, most frequently, it is a strong emotional core, right? Like, it's the angst. It's this journey that the characters are going on that just feels like it resonates in some important way, either with me or with somebody that I love, or I don't know, with like the human condition generally. But that's not the only thing that this can be, because I also love a lot of romances that maybe they're not like super duper emotionally complex, but maybe they're really nostalgic and they remind me a lot of something I loved as a kid, or like a classic rom-com that was really important to me growing up. Or maybe they're really fluffy, but like the right kind of fluffy, where they're not just boring and instead they do the impossible task of melting my rotted heart. You know, I do some kicking of my feet. The book like temporarily buffs me and makes me into less of a misandrist for a few days, those are also viable reasons. But I guess I just need to like get to the end of the book and not feel like it was any story that could have been about anybody. I need to connect with whatever goal I feel like the author might have had. I need everything that happened inside of the book to feel like it had a reason. And I need to feel like I read the book and I got something out of it that I didn't have before and that I couldn't just find anywhere else in the romance aisle at Barnes & Noble, you know? The more I talk, the more I'm like, this is stupid. I'm just saying that I need to have liked the book, but in more words. And it would be fair if you thought that, but that's not exactly what I mean. I don't know, man. Like, the girls who get it, because if it doesn't do this, even if otherwise it was a completely enjoyable book, even if it had other things on this pyramid, even if I had a perfectly good time, if it doesn't have a good one of these, I will form zero memories of my reading experience. It will completely disappear after I wipe the hard drive in my brain at the end of every bi-monthly reading wrap up. I will never think about it ever again. I don't know, it needs to have some kind of special sauce. A good example actually of a book that doesn't have this, in my opinion, for me, this is maybe heretical to say because I know that a lot of people really enjoy this book, but I read The 7-Year Slip, I think, towards the end of last year, maybe. Honestly, I have no idea. And I liked it when I read it. I feel like it had most of these things, maybe not Yearning, but most of the other ones. But it just didn't hit for me. I didn't really care. And likewise, there are books that have like a lot of flaws in them, but I just connect so strongly with the stories that they get buffed. I end up liking them probably more than I should based on how they do in my other metrics. So yeah, I don't know if this one is useful to you, but hopefully the others at least give you an idea of what I'm looking for, because we are finally done with this like extremely long preamble. And it's time to talk about some books I really like. Okay, hello, it's me from the future. So I'm gonna try to keep all of these relatively quick. I have made 4 arbitrary categories that I'm going to go through with you, and I'm just going to give you the synopsis and a bit about why I like each book, nothing crazy. I'm mostly saying that to myself, so that way this video doesn't end up being 40 minutes long, but seriously, nothing crazy, because I like these books a lot. Obviously, that's why they're in this list, and I want you to experience them as I did for the first time, so I don't really want to tell you more than you need to know. And the first category I want to go through with you is some fluffier romances that I really enjoy. I mean, all of these still have B plots, they still have things happening, they still have turmoil per the pyramid, but overwhelmingly the reason why I like them is because they're just cute and they're fun and they're a good time. And the first book of this type that I want to recommend is Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the 3rd book in its trilogy, and as a point of information, if you're not familiar, because this will come up constantly in the romance world and in this video, in romance, trilogy or series almost never means the same thing that it does in like a fantasy world. And when I say something isn't a trilogy, what I mean, unless I say otherwise, is that it's an interconnected standalone. If you just wanted to read this book and this book alone, the only thing that you would lose are a couple of cameos from the main couples in the first 2 books. Like, they'll appear in a scene, and if you've read the other 2 books, it's like, wow, cute. I remember those guys. I'm glad they're doing okay. But that's really it. It's not like there's any essential plot information that you would have to get from the first 2 books before you read this one. That's almost never true in romance. But with that context given for the rest of this video, yeah, this book is the 3rd in a trilogy. I actually do think that the first 2 books are also worth reading. I liked the first one more than the second one, but they're both good. However, this one, in my opinion, is fantastic. It was by far my favorite, and it is about this girl named Eve, who is kind of a trust fund Andy. She doesn't really have a direction in life. She keeps trying new jobs and getting bored and quitting, and it comes to the point that her parents are really fed up with this behavior, so they're like, fuck you, we're taking away your trust fund. Go live among the proletariat for a while and get a real job, and we'll see if you can be reinstated. And she ends up getting this interview to be the chef at this really small bed and breakfast that is run by this guy named Jacob. And the interview does not go well. He kind of immediately dislikes her, but on the way out, she ends up accidentally hitting this man with her car, and she puts him in a cast. And at that point, he's desperate enough because he does really need somebody to help at the bed and breakfast, considering he is now physically impaired. So he ends up having to hire her anyways. And the book is just them forced proximity, working together to run this bed and breakfast and do various associated tasks. It's not really enemies to lovers, but it is bad first impression to reluctant friends and allies to lovers, if you're into that. If you are conceptually into Grumpy Sunshine, but you've read a lot of versions of that have felt stale, or alternatively, you need the Grumpy to not just like bully the Sunshine, because that happens sometimes, and I'm also not into that. This book is a banger representation of that trope that focuses on how you can still have a lot in common under the surface with somebody who seems like your polar opposite at first glance. And this also has really good neurodivergent representation if you're looking for that as well. I don't see that a lot in books, but this one is good enough at that I kind of found it to be a bit of a personal attack sometimes. So take that as you will. Next up, I have Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. I am absolutely an Ali Hazelwood apologist. It's one of my least consistent opinions, considering that I feel like her books are roasted a lot by people who tend to dislike the same kind of things in romance that I do, but I don't care. I'm a defender. I've read all of her main books except for Love on the Brain, and Ali Hazelwood has this very quirked up millennial humor fanficky writing style, which, I mean, that makes sense. That's where she started. And that can definitely rub some people the wrong way. I mean, frequently when I read other books that kind of attempt to do similar things, I don't like it. So I don't really know how to explain to you why it works so well for me when it's her, but it just hits different when it's Ali, okay? I feel so much joy when I read her books. Would you rob me of that joy? There is just nothing quite like the way that Ali Hazelwood writes a pathetic, reverent, yearning man. All of the men in her books are these like tall, gigantic, bantery, big, strong, hyper-competent men, and universally they fall first and they worship the ground that the main characters walk on. And I can't get enough of that. She could write a million of those books and I would be first in line. I love a pathetic man, what can I say? And nobody does pathetic quite like Ali Hazelwood. But my favorite book by her is definitely Check and Mate, which was her first young adult release. This is about a girl who is kind of a fallen chess prodigy. Like, she used to be really, really, really good, but she stopped playing a couple of years ago because of something that happened with her dad, who had taught her chess to begin with. And she's in this really difficult position with her mom and her younger siblings, where she kind of has to take a caretaker role right after she graduates high school. But before one of her best friends goes off to college, she manages to convince her to enter into this chess tournament that is for charity. And for reasons that are truly beyond my comprehension, that you just have to accept for the vibes, her first match inside of this random charity tournament in New York happens to be against the #1 chess player in the entire world, whose name is Nolan. And because she herself was once the chess prodigy, possibly on her way to being the best to ever do it, she absolutely wipes the floor with this guy. Obviously, this creates a lot of media attention for her. There are lots of people who want her to continue playing chess, even though she promised to herself that she never would again. And in the middle of it all, our extremely pathetic man, Nolan, just really, really wants to challenge her to a rematch. But that's the book, and you get, on one hand, this adorable romance, genuinely so cute. I was losing my mind reading it. I had a really good time, but also, at the same time, I really like books that are about sports or games and just have tournaments in them in general. And like, is this at all realistic? No, but it's so fun just reading about a bad bitch who plays chess and also gets to find love. I don't really know what more you want. Next up, after that, I have Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This book is about a girl named Dora who, when she was really little, had a fairy come and take away half of her soul as a part of a deal that her mother made, the details of which she is not privy to. And the way that this actually manifests with her is she just becomes kind of different from the people around her. Like, she feels emotions in response to active situations in her life a lot less strongly than she should. Longer term stuff like malaise or depression or just generally being satisfied or dissatisfied with her life, that she feels pretty normally, but like in the moment she just doesn't react to things in the way that her peers do. But because this book is also a magical historical romance, she's not very marryable in this society where you have to like court people to get married to them. So her guardians have just deemed her kind of doomed, and everybody believes that she's just destined to be a spinster other than her cousin. But when her cousin travels from their villa to London to find a husband for herself, she drags Dora along with the ulterior motive of introducing her to this guy named Elias, who is the famed and powerful court magician in London, and he might have a chance of breaking Dora's curse. The whole thing from the jump can pretty clearly be read as one big metaphor for neurodivergence, and one thing that I will say about the direction of this book is that if you're scared of this going in a kind of like, I can fix her because she's fundamentally broken direction, as it often does in the real world, that's not what happens here. I think personally that this book does a really, really good job of handling that metaphor with care. This book, alongside Check and Mate, genuinely one of the cutest things I've ever read in my entire life. I did not think that it was possible for me to like historical romance until I read this, but the banter in this book is like laced with crack. Like the way that he talks to her, the way that he softens throughout the story, it's so good. It's so magical. And it really does feel like reading an extremely wholesome fairy tale. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just a treat to read something that reminds you so thoroughly of why you love a cute little romance sometimes. Okay, the last book in the fluffy romances category that I really, really liked that I picked up because of BookTok is Red, White, and Royal Blue. And bear with me because it has been a little while since I read this, but I remember this being fire. It's a romance between the first son of the United States and then I think the Crown Prince or second Prince of England, I don't exactly remember. And the reason why they end up having to spend so much time together is because initially they really dislike each other, but they end up getting photographed in this major altercation at like a birthday party or a wedding or something by the tabloids. And so to improve the image of American-British relations, their countries are like, you have to hang out, like you have to become friends, because if you don't, we're all fucked. The optics would be horrible. So that's what they have to do. And obviously it has the unintended consequence of them falling in love. But everything has to be secret because it's a matter of national security, and also because I think his mom, who is the president, is on the campaign trail again for re-election. And look, when I see this book dragged, I mostly see it dragged because it has an unrealistic representation of politics, and like it tries to kind of do political things, but it doesn't really do them in any depth. And let me tell you right now, that is true. If that's the kind of thing that will bother you, this probably is not for you. It is so clearly an unrealistic rose-colored glasses AU that like does not at all deal with imperialism, and things kind of just work out in the end in a way that they really just never would in the real world. And if that is going to bother you, if it's just reminding you about things about this country that you're going to struggle to compartmentalize and it'll just like make you sad and you'll have a bad time, you shouldn't read this book, obviously. But I loved this. I remembered it being very cute. It was, for a long time, I think when I first started getting back into reading, my favorite book that I read because of a TikTok recommendation. One other thing I like about this book and about Casey McQuiston's work generally is I feel like they write really strong ensembles. Like the side characters really feel like real people, and the communities of friends that you see created inside of their books is just a really wonderful part of the experience. And it's really fun. You feel happy when you're reading a book like this, as long as you're in the headspace to enjoy it. But moving on, the next category of romances I would like to share with you are my serious romances. And what I mean by serious is just that they're thematically pretty heavy. And that doesn't mean that they're not funny and that they don't have moments of love and light and humor. I actually think that all three of these do. But overall, I would just give them kind of a buyer beware content warning that you're in for something that is a bit more intense. The first book here that I have to recommend is Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. This is a second chance romance that is about this couple who had gotten a divorce like 1 or 2 or 3 years prior, and they're like mature adults. They're in their late 30s, early 40s, they have teenage children, and they also own a company together. So their lives are still extremely intertwined, but they've been kind of trying to do their own thing for the last little while, but for reasons that you will see when you start this book, they end up drawn back together again. And as they start spending more and more time together, as they start to wonder whether or not they should bring back their relationship, both of them have to go through these individual journeys of grief and trauma and redemption in order to get better to the point where they actually can conceive of being back in the relationship. This book is heavy because the circumstances of their breakup are really heavy, just because what they've gone through in their lives is really heavy. But the experience of actually reading it for me was not sad, because again, it's really a story of redemption and of like recovering from the worst things that have happened to you in your life, so that way you are again able to share love with another person, which to me is a fundamentally uplifting message. And the chemistry and the love that these two characters have for each other throughout the entire book, even way before they have reconciled, it is palpable. You can feel it radiating off the page, and those are always my favorite kinds of romance novels. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I think that second chance can be kind of hard to get right because the author has to both make it understandable and not stupid why the couple broke up in the first place, while also providing a path to real recovery that solves whatever problem would have kept them apart. That is a lot of character development and introspection that you have to do in a genre where the books are relatively short, like less than 400 pages. But when it's done right, and when by the end I'm like, you guys are meant for each other, you're soulmates, there is nothing in this world or galaxy that can keep you apart, it can create some of the strongest couples in romance, in my opinion, because they've been through like real tribulation to get there. And that's what this book feels like. I loved it. I also really appreciated that the main characters are older adults who like make good decisions generally that are consistent with the fact that they have their frontal lobes developed. That can be refreshing sometimes in romance. Just really, really good. And while we're at it, let's talk about the other second chance romance in this video. This is 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. It's probably like the 6th or 7th time I've talked about this book on this channel, so if you've heard it before, you're about to hear it again. But the reason why I talk about this all the time is because to me, this is the blueprint. This is my favorite romance novel. This book is about these two authors who are also older adults. They're in their mid-30s, I think. Shane writes prize-winning bleeding heart literary fiction, and then Eva writes vampire erotica that has this massive cult following. So they're pretty different in terms of the kinds of books that they write, but the one thing that they have in common is that ever since this tumultuous week in June, when they were 17, I think, they were teenagers, they have been taking stories of each other and of this relationship that ended so suddenly they never saw each other again, and they have been drawing from these memories as inspiration and basically writing each other into their books ever since. Which to me is like the peak of yearning. Like you're so down bad for somebody that you met 15 or 20 years ago that even though you don't really have a real outlet for it, you literally cannot subconsciously shut up about them. Like all of your characters are just versions of them that you missed and that you wish you had gotten to know. Like that is crazy. It's so romantic. in my opinion. And in this book, it's many, many years later. Eva now has a daughter from a previous marriage, and the two of them meet up again unexpectedly after all of these years at a literary event. And it turns out that their connection is still kind of there, because of course it is. You've been like throwing logs onto the fire for the last 20 years. And they have to figure out what to do about that, because even though they once cared about each other very deeply, they also both have some harsh memories about what ended up happening between them, which you uncover as you're reading the book. You're getting scenes from the past and also scenes from the present. This book is also an extremely good representation of chronic pain and chronic illness and how to help people that you love through those things. It is serious for sure, like the angst and the turmoil at the center of the story. They've both been through a lot in their lives, but the way that Tia Williams handles those topics and also weaves in a lot of moments of levity and humor, it's just so good. It's so charming. I love their banter. Shane, again, is kind of pathetic with how much he loves her. Genuinely, again, he worships this woman, which, like, fair enough, because Eva is bad. But overall, this book is just so deeply felt and evocative and just brilliantly done. Both of their individual arcs are fantastic and moving. I mean this with my full chest. If you take any singular recommendation from this video and you haven't already read this book, it should be this one. This is the book that I would give people who think that they don't like romance novels. This is how I would challenge them. This is maybe taking it too far, but I feel like if you don't like this book, romance probably just isn't for you. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be, but it's that good. It's that unmissable, in my opinion. Okay, last up in my serious romances category, I have The Heart Principle. This is also the third book in a romance trilogy, and honestly, I mean, I have read the other two books, but I remember very little about them. It was a long time ago. I remember both of them being good, but like nothing about them made it between the folds of my brain. I don't really know what to tell you. However, that is not true with this one. This one really stood out to me. This is a book about a professional violinist who suddenly achieves like widespread popular acclaim after she goes viral on the internet. And at the same time as that, her long-term boyfriend pressures her into entering an open relationship, which she does not want to do, but he like wants to bang other girls before he finally decides to propose to her. That's kind of the vibe. It's really slimy. So in an attempt to make him jealous and make him regret his decision, she swears that she's gonna go on this like massive crazy string of one-night stands until she finally meets Kwan, who is the male main character. She meets him, I think on Tinder, like somewhere on the apps, and they meet up, but because of reasons beyond their control, every time they meet up, they're unable to actually follow through on having a one-night stand. Things keep coming up, it's kind of comical, and they end up becoming actual friends along the way, which is really important because what this book actually ends up being is a really moving portrait of navigating complicated relationships with your family when somebody is in need of full-time care. Something really bad happens to somebody that Anna knows, and she is swept up into dealing with the aftermath and dealing with the consequences. And I don't want to say too much more for fear of spoilers, but that is really what this story is. It is half this really sweet and tender romance that kind of comes up out of nowhere and that encourages the main character to reevaluate how she's let people treat her entire life. But then it's also this kind of heavy family drama that, at least for me, like, I'm gonna be vague because again, I don't want to spoil, but I watched my mom go through something similar with her family and her parents and her siblings, and it really rang true to a lot of the experiences that I saw her have. I feel like normally when a book splits its attention this much and tries to be both a romance and also contemporary fiction, it normally ends up doing either one or both of those things kind of badly. But with this one, I don't think that's the case. I think that both parts are really well developed, really well executed. I do remember the ending of this book feeling a little bit fast, but other than that, I was surprised by how much I grew to care about these characters. So yeah, those are my like heavier romance recommendations. But say you're looking for something that is kind of a mix between those two things. Say you're looking for books that have like a serious core. Real shit is happening inside of the B plot and it matters, but it's also cute and fluffy and fun. I have two popular authors that I feel strike that balance really well. And I'm gonna move and film me talking about them in front of my lamp because once more, it is already almost dark again before 4:30. Okay, hello, here we are. The first author I want to talk about, God's Gift, Emily Henry, and I'm going to go into very little depth with her because A, she's one of the most popular romance authors writing right now. She is selling hundreds of thousands of hardcover books on release in a genre where almost everything is paperback because that's just how much people like her. Basically, all of her books are being made into movies right now because they're just very screenplayable because they read kind of like classic romantic comedies, and I adore her. I feel like she deserves every single bit of success that she has achieved. Her books can genuinely hit you so hard if you end up accidentally relating too much to one of the main characters like I did. Cough cough Nora, but also somehow both main characters and people we meet on vacation. I don't want to talk about it, but she just does a really good job of making main characters that feel like real people. Also, almost always her main characters are going to be working in jobs that deal somehow with writing or books or just like creative pursuits, which some people might find overdone, but for me, they're some of my favorite romance novel professions, in part because you can often tell that the authors have actually experienced a lot of what they're writing about. So again, the main character characters feel all the more tangible because of it. But yeah, my favorite Emily Henry book, if you're curious, is Book Lovers. I read it when I was at the peak of my like tabbing everything phase. I lent it to my best friend once when she was going on a cruise, and she was so afraid of like waterlogging the book or breaking the spine or something when she was on the cruise that she carried it around inside of a giant plastic bag. That is how well known my adoration of this book is among my friends. The main premise of this is you have a literary agent whose name is Nora, and she is kind of cast as the other girl inside of your classic rom-com. Like, the man goes back to his hometown and meets the nice girl who runs a bakery, and then they end up running off together, and he breaks up with his mean girlfriend in the city. Like, Nora is the mean girlfriend in the city. That is kind of how her relationship history has gone. She's like the Hallmark movie casualty. But outside of her romantic life, she is a shark. She's hyper competent, extremely good at her job. She's ambitious, she's fiercely loyal, very reliable, very stability minded. But the actual events of this book begin when Nora ends up agreeing to go on this trip to North Carolina alongside her dear sister, who I think is like super pregnant and just kind of going through it. And they're really close. So even though Nora is like allergic to small towns, she decides to go anyways. And when she gets there, who else happens to be inside of this small town in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, but her industry enemy, who is this editor named Charlie, who was like really mean to her once about one of the books that she represented, and just generally is kind of also known to be a little bit of an asshole inside of the industry in the same way that Nora is. You know, if you're a mean, jaded, pessimistic bitch like I am, you too will see yourself in Book Lovers. You too will feel attacked by the conversations that these characters have in the best way. It's really good. But moving on from Emily Henry, the next author who I feel like strikes a good balance between serious and silly cute is Abby Jimenez. And I think that she has like 3 or 4 more books than this, but these are the only 3 that I have read. It's an interconnected standalone trilogy once again. This one, Part of Your World, is probably my favorite, but it's closely followed actually by Just for the Summer, which is her newest one. And I don't know if this is going to come off correctly, but I say this as a compliment. I feel like Abby Jimenez in a lot of ways is like a diet Emily Henry. I think in general her characters feel a little bit less real, her premises are a little bit less interesting, but she has a lot of the same talent of Emily Henry when it comes to writing couples that are like so made for each other, that have just such convincing chemistry and such complementary personalities and strengths and weaknesses and histories. No Abby Jimenez man feels like an actual person that walks on this earth. They're all like genuinely perfect human beings. I remember reading somewhere once that she bases all of the men in her books off of different aspects of her husband's personality, which like is one of the sweetest things I've ever heard in my life, but also kind of acts to doubt, because the way that her men act, it's like wish fulfillment. That's what reading her books is like. I do think they lean on average a little bit darker than Emily Henry books. The characters typically have more complicated histories, but not by a lot. I think they're in the same tier, but they are, again, unexpectedly emotional. Like, they're definitely not just silly little goofy romances in the same way that Ali Hazelwood books are silly little goofy romances. Like, very different vibes, very different author experiences. Again, my favorite book by her is probably Part of Your World. This is the first one in this little trilogy, and it is about this woman named Alexis. Haha, me too. But she is a doctor in the big city, and she's driving her little car down some random county road when she blows out a tire, and this guy named Daniel comes out to save the day and like plop on her spare so that way she can continue on her merry way. Except she doesn't continue on her merry way. Instead, she stays and talks to him because he's really hot. But they obviously hit it off, and the central conflict of this book is that Alexis is from like medical doctor royalty. Like, the hospital that she works at is named after her family, and she works an incredibly high octane, stressful job. And Daniel is just kind of a guy who lives in the small town and is very beloved by his community, but also like he's not gonna uproot his life and go become a house husband to a doctor. Like, that's not going to happen. No man in real life acts like Daniel in this book. Not for a moment do you believe that that's possible. And that does make the conflict of the story a little bit less realistic, because the entire time you're just like, dude, Alexis, you've clearly found the perfect man. He's like a one-of-one man, right? And you're about to let him slip through your fingers. Like, you're a fucking idiot. You're not going to fight with everything that you have for this relationship. Like, I kind of found that doubtful, but I don't know. I mean, girlie had other priorities, I guess. Point being, I think that Abby Jimenez is similar to Emily Henry in the right ways. I don't think it scratches quite the same itch as an Emily Henry book for me, but it's close. And with 1 year between each Emily Henry release, sometimes close is all you have. Okay, those are all of the actual popular romance books that I'm going to be recommending in this video, but I wanted to do one last category, kind of rapid fire real quick, called Not a Romance But, because I have 4 books here that are not romances in terms of genre, but they have love stories that are just classics. 3 of them are viral on TikTok, but the last one actually is like not viral. Like it doesn't really meet the standards of this video at all. But the first 3 kind of do. These are all books that I read completely off of TikTok that I do feel like in some capacity are unmissable love stories. The first one is The Song of Achilles. This is not a romance because it's sad. So you've been warned about that. I remember seeing videos of like teenage girls weeping and just shaking their book in like 0.5 speed at the camera. And the TikTok is captions like, why would you do this to me? Videos like that, regretfully, are very compelling to me. So I did pick it up. I did have to read it. And I've said it before on this channel, but this book I feel like is a pattern breaker when it comes to book talk. I don't really know why it's as popular as it is. It is pretty slow. It's very descriptive. It's very literary. The writing style is gorgeous, but again, it takes a while to get from point A to point B in this. And it just surprises me that this blew up as much as it did off of BookTok. I feel like it's not quite the vibe that you would expect, but it's really, 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 really good. The Song of Achilles, and I mean, disclaimer, I'm not an expert on the Iliad. Like, I kind of have no idea what I'm talking about. I don't know. Looking at the story of Achilles and the story of the Iliad through a queer lens, which is basically a real lens if you actually think about what Greek history was like, this book accomplishes that goal in the most tragically beautiful way. I think if you're okay with taking a slower pace, if you have an appreciation of history, even if you don't have a massive amount of knowledge of history, if you love books that are lyrical and beautifully written and relationships that like will absolutely break your heart. I don't want to spoil it, but like also, I mean, the Iliad was dropped like thousands of years ago. It's not like it's a new release. I don't know, man. This is just unmissable in my opinion. The next, not a romance, but book that I have to recommend is This Is How You Lose the Time War. This book is about these 2 women who are on opposing sides of this like massive, pretty confusing science fiction war that's across time and space. And both of them are hunting the other person and kind of like laying traps for each other. But instead of laying actual traps, they end up just writing each other letters and hiding them wherever they think the other person will eventually look, even if they don't know exactly when or how. So they end up having this epistolary relationship as enemies across the aisle inside of this war. And initially, what starts off as just kind of blanket disdain turns into flirtatious banter, and then ultimately evolves into this very deep and soul-affirming love, all through the many, many years of being in this war and sharing letters with the other person. There is also normal text in this book, like you're reading their thoughts and feelings and about how they're finding each other's messages, but really the reason why you're here is to read the letters. Because, fair warning, there is a lot about this book that does not make any sense. This book does not give a fuck whether you understand what's going on or not. It will not hold your hand, it will not explain itself or how it works, but you just kind of have to accept that in order to access what I feel are some of the most beautiful love letters that I've ever read in my entire life. Like, the prose of this book and how the authors were able to write about what it is to love another person and about yearning, like yearning across time and space, which is like giga yearning, ultimate yearning. Also, it's during a war. Like, you can't really have yearning that is more severe than that. It is just absolutely beautiful. Like, it's not my favorite book I've ever read. I definitely prefer in literature for plot elements to be a little bit more fleshed out, to have more of an understanding of what the fuck is happening. However, I think that if you're looking to read something that is just deeply romantic, if you would like to download to your brain some quotes about love that will probably stay with you until the day that you die, until the day that your soul is cleaved from your body and you are buried into the cold earth, like, the love story inside of this book is fantastic. Next up, second to last, I would be remiss if I did not talk to you today on this eve about The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is a young adult fantasy trilogy. It's exceedingly popular on like every corner of the internet, but if you don't know what it's about, it follows this girl named Jude, who is this human girl that was kind of taken in alongside her 2 sisters when she was very little into the world of fairy. And the Holly Black variant of fae is real shit. Like, they're just mean for fun all of the time. Honestly, they're kind of psychopathic. Mortal suffering is incredibly entertaining to these people. They're absolutely feral, but so is Jude, so is the main character. And her whole thing is that she would like to achieve power inside of this world that she was raised in. But that is obviously very difficult because she is not herself fae, she doesn't have access to the same magic. But what she does have is like a lot of brain cells and also the audacity. Like, she also has the audacity to do some insane things. Before I actually get into why I like it, the romance in this series is definitely a side plot. Like, I describe this book to people typically as Game of Thrones for teenage girls, not derogatory, because more than anything, that's what's happening here. Like, it's about Jude's machinations and her cunning and about all of the insane shit that she will do to achieve power. That is definitely the main thing that is going on in this series, but the romance that does exist is so good. It is extremely slow burn. It is true enemies to lovers. Like, they still hate each other, at least through the end of the first book, and they prove it. They are mean to each other. They do like vile things, but it's mutual. It's not just going one way. And it really drives home that classic thought that the line between love and hate is extremely thin, because the way that these people are just obsessed with each other, it's iconic. It's so good. I picked this book to talk about in this video because it's probably my favorite subplot romance that I've read in a fantasy novel. And it has some stiff competition, but I don't know, man. This scratched all of the right parts of my brain. I absolutely adore a truly feral woman. I love a girl who knows how to get what she wants, and the dynamic that she has with Carden and how that evolves throughout the trilogy. It's so much fun. It's really, really, really good. The last book I want to talk about today is also the one that it's not a romance, and it's also not popular online. So definitionally, does this belong in this video? No, but I'm going to talk about it anyways. This is Sunburn by Chloe Michelle Howarth, and this was sold to me as Call Me By Your Name, but for the girls. But I would actually pitch it as like sapphic coming of age normal people for the girls who have religious trauma and are like way too into indie alternative music. That is the vibe of this book. It is about this girl, Lucy, who is growing up in the 1980s in Ireland, and everybody inside of her small town has always expected her to end up with her childhood best friend, whose name is Martin, and who also is like obviously infatuated with her, but she just does not feel the same way. She doesn't know why. She kind of assumes it'll happen eventually, but instead she ends up slowly becoming obsessed and ultimately falling in love with another one of her childhood friends, whose name is Susanna. And the book just follows their tumultuous relationship over the course of the next few years, as Lucy also comes into herself and kind of figures out what she wants with her life. This book is very literary, it's very descriptive, it's slow, it's beautifully, beautifully, beautifully written, but like it takes some time for things to cook inside of this. But I can't not recommend it inside of this video, even though again, it does not really fit the rest of the books, mostly because A, I haven't talked about it yet. Like I read this very recently and I haven't yet had the chance to debrief with you guys in a wrap up, but also I just think it portrays the very specific experience that you have with your first love extremely well, which is especially true for a lot of queer people who are kind of pulled between the do I want to be this person or do I want to be with this person. Those are really complicated feelings to navigate, especially when you don't understand yourself yet because you're young, and it can make you do some pretty like mean and bad things, which is also true in this book. Both characters are kind of unlikable, but once again, true to form in this video, the like reverent, almost religious yearning for the other person that they're experiencing inside of this book is just next level. I really liked this, and I'll talk more about it when I do my wrap up, but for now, just consider it appended to the end of this video. Anyways, with that, that's the last book I have to talk about today. You can consider this to be, for now, at least until I read more, my definitive list of like approved from BookTok romance novels. But thank you for getting this far. I really hope that this wasn't too long, but who's to say? I also would like to acknowledge that I've been gone for a little while. I think I posted my last video at like the end of October. You know it's bad when you start getting comments from people that are like, XOXO, hope you're okay. It's really sweet. I do appreciate it, but it's like, oh man, it's been a while, hasn't it? At the beginning of November, I was doing this other massive project, and after the election, it just became pretty hard for me to like focus on making silly little videos or like see value in that, really. I don't know. I'm kind of naturally a doomer. Like I have a natural inclination towards existential dread and sadness and fear for myself and those I love who are at more risk than me. And I just like couldn't be on camera. Like I couldn't pretend to be having a good time. Like I'm not very good at that. I kind of just had to wait until I was able to sort through some of my feelings and see the point again in making content that does do good things and that does hopefully help some of you cope, for lack of a better word. So I don't know, I want to like get on my soapbox. That's not the point of me saying any of this, but I guess I just wanted to say that like, if you're sad, me too. If you're worried either for yourself or for somebody that you love, me too. I took 5. I rallied, I did other things with my free time. I like let myself feel my feelings, which is horrifying. And I thought about you guys and the nice comments that you leave me and the ways that I hope that I can inspire you guys to like read more broadly and challenge yourself and continue moving forward even when things are bad, because all of that sucks. It's like not fun, but it's really necessary right now. Anyways, I don't know if the video I was originally working on will see the light of day because it was kind of a bit for it to release at a specific time, and that time has now passed. But that's the video. I am done. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being here. Thank you for putting up with my random diatribe at the end of the romance recommendations video. Oh my god. And I will see you hopefully very soon. Okay? Okay. Bye.